Y'all do not understand how excited I am to film this video. I have been thinking about this nonstop for the past 72 hours because I came up with the idea about 72 hours ago and then I was like, wait, we must do this. Welcome to a quarter one recap of HRCYED. We are over a quarter of the way through, but I didn't have the idea till now. So you may be wondering, Sarah, you've already read multiple books in the week since week 12. That is correct. That is entirely true. And I'm very sorry. I'm very sorry. We're gonna have some superlatives we're gonna go through. We're gonna look at some stats and data. I am a numbers girl. I love me a graph. I love me some data. So I had the time of my life putting this data together for you. And I thought, what better way to celebrate being a quarter of the way through than to show you some graphs. And if that's not your love language, I'm very sorry, but graphs are my love language, so you're getting them. Anything formatting makes me happy. The first graph we're gonna put up is how often did I read? In July, I read every single day. In August, I read every single day. In September, I did not. It didn't happen. I had multiple weddings that I was working this weekend and there were like family events going on. So I knew that September would not be a 30 out of 30 days read. I only missed 4 days though. So I'm pretty proud of that. I read almost every single day for quarter one of HRCYED. And I read great books. I really enjoyed myself. So that is the stats for how often I read. Then let's show how far into the board we are. For 88% of the board, I have read at least one book to fill that spot. I only have, I believe, 3 spots left. This is farther than I expected to be by the end of quarter one. I have finished 24% of the board. Most of those were like 1 or 2 book slots. So that's not overly impressive. What's going to be impressive is when I finish the alphabet challenge, which has 26 books. So this is what it's looking like for the board stats. Now let's get into some of my stats. The next thing I wanted to track was how much I was reading. So I wanted to count A, how many books do I read in a month? B, how many pages do I read in a month? And then C, what is the average of pages I read per day? Per month. In July, I read 142 pages on average per day, and I read 13 books. In August, I read 10 books, and I read on average 124 pages per day. And then in September, I only read 5 books, but you can tell that I read more pages per day that I read, which means I read longer books in September, which makes sense because I did read The Way of Kings in September, which is a 1,000-page book. So that graph makes sense to me. I'm not surprised by that, but it does look like I read shorter books earlier in the quarter and then longer books towards the end of the quarter. And I did just read more overall in July than I read in August or September. So the next thing I wanted to learn was whether or not DNFing books impacted my engagement in reading as a whole. So this graph has 3 different lines on it. In teal, we have how many books did I read that week. The blue is how enthusiastic or engaged was I in reading as a whole. And then the yellow is the times I DNF books. I expected DNFing to have an impact on my engagement level. And so that's what I was really curious to find out if that was true or not. What I've realized is actually DNFing doesn't impact me that much. I thought I'd only DNF to 1 book. Turns out I DNF'd 3 books this quarter. You can see the graph goes down when I only read 1 book, and usually that's a book that I probably should have DNF'd, but I was really forcing my way to read through. So one of those weeks is Time of Your Life by Jess Hastings, which I did not enjoy. I was forcing myself to read it because it was a new release, and I just did not want to read. The engagement level went down significantly. I found that really interesting to see, I go down a lot when I'm really trying to push myself to read a book rather than when I DNF'd. It really didn't impact my engagement. Like in week 4, my engagement is high, but I did only read 1 book and I DNF'd 1 book, but I still was really invested in the reading process and HRCYED as a whole. So that's a very interesting takeaway that I did not expect to find out. Next, what genres am I reading? This was a category I was not surprised by the results of, but was very curious to see what they were as a whole. So romance ate up most of what I read, then fantasy, then literary fiction and historical fiction tied for 3rd, then thriller, sci-fi, nonfiction tied for 4th, and classic YA and comic tied for 5th. So I only read one classic, one comic, one YA book. And then the nonfiction is a memoir and a faith book. So I didn't split that up, but I suppose I could have put those into different categories as well for theology and memoir, as opposed to just nonfiction as a grouping. I read more sci-fi than I ever expected to. I'm not a huge sci-fi girl, so I don't read it hardly ever. So reading 2 1/4 is really surprising to me. Romance, not surprising. It's the genre I typically tend towards. Although I did realize that the romance books I rated were all around 4 stars. In general, I do not rate a romance book over 4.5 maybe. So that was a really interesting wake-up call that some of the fantasy and literary and historical fiction I rated significantly higher, but I'm not reading as much of it. That has me wondering if I'm rating it higher because I'm not exposed to it as much, so it feels more novel or exciting, or if it's because I just like those genres better but don't end up reading them as much. That's something I'm going to watch out for Q2. The next thing I wanted to discover is how much of my reading is standalone novels compared to a series. So I had 4 different categories for this, but I ended up not finishing any series this quarter. So that was a 0. I didn't put it on the graph. Most of what I read is a standalone. I was actually surprised that I started this many series. I will say a number of the series in there are like romance series. Some of the characters interconnect, but it's not a huge storyline throughout the series, such as the Stormlight Archive. I technically did start a number of series, but I don't really think of them as series because most of them read like standalones. And then I only continued 2 or 3 books. So most of what I read was a standalone or starting a series in and of itself. I have noticed in myself in my reading habits that I don't typically finish series, which is kind of wild of me. That's kind of unhinged behavior. I want to invest more time in reading series. I find that I really enjoy them. I like the process of really connecting to characters and storylines. I prefer a TV show to a movie. It's not surprising that I would enjoy a series, and yet I'm not reading much of them, and oftentimes I'm quitting them halfway through. I don't love a ton of romantasy series, and maybe it's just that I read too many so they all felt really similar. But if you want me to do a series I'm in the middle of and probably will never finish video, or series I'm considering finishing video, let me know, because I think that could actually be really interesting to do like a deep dive on here's everything I've started and then here's what I actually want to finish versus what I need convincing to finish. Next, I did a dive into whose books am I reading? How often am I reading a debut versus an author who's new to me versus an author I've read before? I was really pleasantly surprised to find out that I read more authors that are unfamiliar to me than ones I've read before. I really expected this to be the reverse. Obviously, it's pretty close. It's not a drastic difference. At the start of the year, one of my reading goals was to read more authors. I wanted to expand my reading horizons, and so I have read all 10 of the authors I initially said I wanted to read, and I've read significantly more than that too. So that was a fun graph to see, like, ooh, this was a goal I had and I have in fact accomplished it. Okay, this is another very interesting graph to me. So this is how much of my TBR I completed. So in both July and September, I only read 3 of the 6 books I picked out. And then in August, I read 4 of the 6 books I picked out. What's interesting is I have been doing a monthly TBR since February. Obviously, I've not filmed them. I did not start YouTube until July, but I typically read a higher percentage of my TBR. Earlier this year, I was averaging 5 or 6 of the 6 books read. So that's definitely declined since I started HRCYED. And I'm not sure if that's because I'm reading books to fill in spots as opposed to just reading what I normally would or what I'm interested in. I'm curious to see if this graph continues to average around 50% or if it goes up higher or lower as HRCYED goes on, especially as I have fewer spots to fill, so I need to pick more specific books to read. Let's talk about the discoveries I made this month based on all of the data I just data dumped on you. I'm not really interested in sci-fi or specifically time travel books. Those do not really hold an appeal to me. Typically the lower books I've rated have been travel, sci-fi, or magical realism as well. I'm not super interested in those concepts. Even if the book is a good book or the questions they ask are interesting to me, the content of the book I do not find overly interesting. I do like cozy fantasy. So things like The Witch's Guide to Magical Innkeeping, loved that. Which is funny because it feels like if I don't really like the like magical realism. I probably wouldn't like that, but au contraire, I loved it. So I'm gonna have to keep an eye out on where that line is between like cozy fantasy and magical realism, and where I'm happy and where I'm not. I also discovered that I should DNF more. It does not impact me as much as I thought it would. And if I know I'm not liking a book, or even soft DNFing is a good idea too. I soft DNF'd a book in quarter 1 that I've actually just finished now in quarter 2. I talked about it in the last video. It was Everything is Tuberculosis by John Green. When I picked it up, I just did not have the capacity to be invested in a history and everything that is beautiful about that book that it had to offer. So I put it down for about 3 weeks maybe, and then I picked it up and loved it. I think I need to be more attuned to what I want to read, how I'm feeling while I'm reading it, and giving books a fair shot and reading them when I'm ready for them, rather than really trying to like force myself to power through and just get it done. I think some of the books that I didn't like so much, maybe if I'd read it at a different time, I would have enjoyed more. Am I reading more because I'm doing HRCYED? I would say initially yes. When I started off this challenge, I read 5 books a week for 2 weeks straight. Obviously, that's not sustainable behavior. I understand that. I get it. I haven't continued. I do think I already was reading a high percentage of books. So in the initial first 2 weeks, yes, I was reading more than normal. But since then, I have been reading consistently about as much as I read before HRCYED. So off the bat, yes, I read more, but overall, not really. Do I recommend HRCYED? Yes. But I do think you should make it your own. I think HRCYED is a great format. I think the bingo style board is really easy to engage with. I think it's really fun. I think the graphics with it especially make it a really enjoyable or pleasant reading adventure. But I think like anything in life, you should not be a slave to a challenge. It is a challenge for you. You're really just gamifying life and making some fun out of it. And I think if you're going to force yourself to read things that you know you don't like, you're not going to enjoy the challenge and you're going to end up resenting your hobbies. So if, for example, there was a category on next year's HRCYED that was like read 10 sci-fi time travel books, I'm going to change that because I know I'm not going to like that. And then I'm going to end up really disliking my reading experience. Ultimately, these challenges are in place, yes, to expand our reading knowledge, but also to have fun. Hobbies are meant to be a fun thing to lean into and to do, and they're not supposed to be something that you're like plugging away at and just trying to get done and hating. Like, we have enough in our lives through work or politics or family dynamics or whatever that's just hard, and hobbies are not supposed to be that. They're supposed to be the things that you really look forward to and enjoy. And so in my opinion, for any challenge, HRCYED or otherwise, it's okay to adjust the challenge for your reading taste. I definitely did. I got some backlash for it, and that's okay because not everyone has to like what I like. Ultimately, I'm okay with getting a little bit hate for doing my own version of HRCYED because it's my version and I'm the one reading the books and putting them on a board, and not everyone has to agree with me or what I want to read, and that's okay too. And I'm not gonna hate on anyone who's upset about that because you're allowed to be upset about it, but I'm also allowed to change it, and both of those things can be true. As long as you're having fun, yes, do HRCYED. I have some awards to give out, so we're gonna go through some superlatives, and then I'm going to tell you my top 10 books of HRCYED. Since I'm only in quarter 1, picking my top 10 books is going to be significantly easier than me in quarter 4, and I'm already dreading having to pick my top favorite books through an entire year for HRCYED in quarter 4. So, wish me luck. Okay, but the superlatives first. Most chaotic read goes to Time of Your Life. This was the wildest book, the most unhinged book. I did not like this book, we know this. It just made me feel so angry and annoyed and frustrated. I did not like our characters. I did not like the decisions they made. I did not like their entitlement. I'm not much of a drama girly. This was definitely a chaotic story, a chaotic reading experience. I just wanted it to be done, and then it was. And then I moved on. Best character energy. I personally really loved Nan from One Golden Summer. She is the grandma, and she is just so spunky. She's kind of demanding, and she's really sweet, and she also has her own character arc that she goes on. She's not only present to support the love story, she also has her own story going on simultaneously, and those are my favorite side characters. Book I can't shut up about. Y'all know what I'm about to say. And I'm sorry in advance. Maybe I should just call this author I can't shut up about, and that would be Brandon Sanderson. The book would be The Way of Kings, and the Stormlight Archive as a whole. Obviously in quarter two, I have read more books of the Stormlight Archives, so there may be some influence on my opinion about this. I feel like I've been talking about this in YouTube videos. I've been talking about this to my friends. I can't shut up about the Stormlight Archive. I understand the hype now. Book I immediately forgot I read. I had to go through my books to find out because I couldn't remember, because I forgot. And there were 3 books that I just could not remember the plot of. I could remember the trope, but I could not remember the characters. I couldn't remember details. And that would be Summer in the City, The Hunting Party, and Things We Never Got Over. Don't really remember them. Don't want to reread them. They just kind of happened. Maybe that's harsh. Sorry. Book I wish I could read for the first time again. That would be The Giver of Stars. I loved this book a lot, but I will say, having read some new favorite books in quarter two, I'm very biased. In this moment of my life, this would not be the book I want to reread again, but if I had finished quarter one and immediately recorded this, it would have been. So get excited for quarter two. I've read a lot of good books in quarter two. Okay, biggest reaction, that would be The Great Alone. I was sobbing, I was weeping. I think I even put a video of me crying on YouTube, which is kind of crazy. I had a huge reaction to that book. It made me feel all the feelings. Kristen Hanna is amazing at that. Every book I read by her, I sob. It is what it is. Favorite cover, this would be God of the Woods. The cover on this book is so clever. It wraps in perfectly with the story without giving any of the story away. It's really intriguing. So you look at it and you're like, what am I looking at? I understand that it's woods and it's paint, but why? And then as you read, it's like, oh my gosh, that's brilliant. It's so good. I really enjoyed that cover. And that is definitely my favorite cover so far. So now let's get into my top 10 favorite books that I've read because of HRCYED. We're gonna go in descending order. In 10th spot, we have Anxious People, then Loveology, then The Way of Kings, Emma, Tomorrow, Tomorrow, and Tomorrow, The Night Circus, The Book of Doors, My Friends, The Great Alone, and The Giver of Stars would be the top pick. Those are my top 10 books. I'm very curious to see how many of these current top 10 books are going to be on my quarter four top 10 list. I've already read some in quarter two that I've loved that would make this list. And so I'm curious how many get knocked down, how many stay. So we'll have to see. Since we've been talking about quarter two so much, let's make some predictions about what I think I'll read or get into for quarter two. So I do think that overall, my ratings will be higher. And I think part of that's because I'm being more intentional with what books I'm reading. I'm trying to read books that I really think I'm going to enjoy, and I don't want to read as many contemporary fiction or contemporary romance because I've noticed that I'm just not rating them as highly or enjoying them as much as I expect to. I also want to be more intentional with the TBR in quarter two. On average, I did a very poor showing of my TBR completion rate, so I do want to see more books read. I do think that means that I need to be more specific with which books I'm picking to read for my TBR. So I think that's something I'm really interested in doing more of. I'm also interested in DNFing more and being quicker to put a book down that I don't like. I only have so much time to read. I am a very busy person despite reading so many books. And so when I'm reading, I want it to be really enjoyable and good. And so if I get to that 50% mark and I'm still not loving it, I want to be quicker to just be like, you know what, I'm not going to finish it, because typically I do force myself to finish. It's quite rare that I will DNF. I'll just rate it quite lowly. And then lastly, I want to continue or complete more series in quarter two. I realized how many series I started this quarter, and I would love to keep plugging through some series. And like I said earlier, if you want a video on all of the series I'm in the middle of, I would be very open to making that. So let me know if that's of interest. And I think it could be fun, especially if you convince me to read series that I'm on the fence about, because most of them I'm like, meh, I could read it. Don't really, I could. So let me know if you want that. But this is the progress we have made on the HRCYED board overall. We started with 0. We obviously have made a lot more progress. We've read a lot of books. We read 27 books in the first quarter, and we are already in the second quarter. We are going strong, and I'm really excited to see how these stats progress or adjust over time. I hope you enjoyed stats. I'm a big stats girl, so if you did, let me know. I always love hearing from you in the comments. But for now, keep resting, keep reading, and I will see you soon.